Hi, in this lecture, you will learn what the triggers are and why we use them. We know that we can make some DML, DDL, etc. operations within our database. But did you think what happens when you run a DML or DDL statement? Do you have any control on them? Actually, we don't know yet. But sometimes we need to make some last things before or after doing some business like DML, DDL, log on, log off, etc. For example, I may want to check whether the specified column is suitable for our table or not. How can we do that? Maybe we can do that with some constraints. As you can see here, we did some tests actually. We have not null constraints, primary key constraints, or check constraints, etc. With these constraints, we can prevent the unintentional DML operations. However, these are not so strong testers. For example, what if I want to control another table before the insert? What if I want to use some if-then else logics or loops, etc.? Or what if I want to insert some log records based on the updates, deletes, etc.? We cannot do this with the constraints. Now, let me explain you again more clearly. Once we make a DML or DDL operations, or there are some more but I will show them later, sometimes we need to make some tests just before or after these operations. So we enforce the user to insert or update the data just as we want. To do this, we have a couple ways. The first way is doing that with the data types. We specify the data type as date or varchar2, or we specify some decimal points, lengths, etc. With this way, the users cannot insert an inappropriate value. The second way is we can use our constraints for our pretests. With this way, we can either check if the foreign key column value is there in the reference table, or we can check if all the primary key values are unique, or we can set a column not null to prevent null values into that specific column. Or we can have our check constraints with some stronger tests like salary is greater than 0 here. However, these are very simple tests, and most of the times they are not enough for the business tests. Besides, these tests are only for the pretest operations. And besides, you may need to make some after tests in your work. Now, let's turn back to our document. Now, for some better tests and before and after works, we use the triggers. Actually, we cannot simplify triggers just as tests. For a better explanation, I can say that triggers are the PLSQL blocks that stored in the database and executed, or some people call it as fired, before or after or instead of a specific event. Triggers are executed automatically by the database itself based on how you declared them. You will see all of them in details in the further lectures. But for now, let me explain you why triggers are important. Maybe the triggers are one of the most important subjects of PLSQL within your real work. Because in a real work, you do some business. These business things generally do not need so complex codes. Most of the times, you do them with very simple codes. But the main thing in here is how much you know will take you a higher position in your career. Alright, in a real work, maybe you will use mostly packages and triggers, because the main business things are done with using these subjects. Besides, if you learn triggers well, you may ease a lot of things that some others cannot do easily. So my recommendation to you is listen to this subject carefully and try to learn with your best. This subject is so important. Great, now let's turn back to our subject. Now we know that triggers are the code blocks that run before or after or instead of a specific event based on how we define them. So, where can we define the triggers? Triggers are defined on a table, view, schema, or the database itself. We will see all these with all the details in the next lectures. So no need to confuse you with these for now. But let me show you when the triggers are fired. By the way, fired is used for the execution of a trigger. Triggers are fired whenever the following things happen in the database. Of course, based on how you define your triggers. The first one is when a DML operation occurs. We know that DML stands for inserts, updates, or delete statements. When one of these statements occurs, if you created your trigger for running with the DML operations, the specified trigger is automatically executed or fired by the database. The second one is when a DDL operation occurs. We know that DDL stands for create, alter, or drop statements. When the structure of an object changes. So you can set your trigger to be fired when one of these statements occurs. This is also very useful in logging or preventing invalid structural changes. The third one is when a specific database operation occurs like logon, logoff, startup, shutdown, or server error, etc. This is also very useful in security and logging. All these trigger types are called as database triggers. We will cover these triggers in this course. On the other hand, Oracle has another trigger type, application triggers. Application triggers occur within a specific application like Oracle Forms Developer or another Oracle applications. Alright, so why we use triggers? You can create triggers to secure your tables. With triggers, you can allow or reject the access to the tables or values. You can test the values to be inserted and allow or reject these operations. You can enforce the integrity constraints with the simple constraints, but with triggers, you can implement more complex integrity rules. The Oracle server does not log your tables normally. You can use some tools to log your data, but the cheapest way is logging with using the triggers. Besides, if you want to take a copy of a table, it is not easy to do that synchronously. But you can take the copy of the tables into the replicas with using triggers easily. Normally, Oracle Server logs the events explicitly, so you can use the triggers to log the events easily. The only way to derive some data based on a collection of the data is using triggers. So you can have a brief of the data or the result of computing different tables, etc. with using the triggers. Then you can store these data into some other tables and report to your managers easily and faster. Alright, I think now you know why we use the triggers. So let's check what the trigger types are. Actually, in general, we have three types of triggers: DML triggers, compound triggers, and non-DML triggers. DML triggers have three branches: before triggers, after triggers, and instead of triggers. And non-DML triggers have two branches: DDL event triggers and database event triggers. We will see all these in the further lectures with all the details. As our standard style, we will start from the simplest one, DML triggers, and continue with the harder ones. So to sum up, we use triggers to test the data before the DML, or secure the data in database from the wrong usages, or copy, duplicate some data, or to create and maintain log tables, etc. We can use database triggers at anywhere we want to make some before, after, or instead of logics. I mean, I can say that, do that before this insert event, or do that right after the alter command of that table, or do this right before the shutdown progress, etc. We can create triggers on tables, views, users, or the database itself, and they are fired automatically by the database when the specified event occurs. We have a couple types of triggers, and we will learn them one by one in the further lectures. So this is the end of this lecture. See you in the next lectures.